Everybody ready? All right. Let's get this pounder going. We will now call the Plan Commission of September 28th to order. Roll call, please.
Anna here.
Sullivan here.
Willow here.
Lark here. Kavich here. Guzikowski here. Goldani here. Seifert here.
Chandler here.
And that will get us to the minutes of September 14th, 2021. If everybody please take a look. And when you are satisfied they're in order and there's no discussions, corrections, errors, motion please.
Seifert moves to approve the minutes of September 14th, 2021.
Oracle second. Roll call, starting with Commissioner Hanna.
Anna, aye.
Sullivan, aye.
Willow, aye.
Lark, aye. Kavich abstains.
Guzikowski abstain.
Goldani, aye.
Seifert, aye.
Chandler, aye.
Okay, and item 4 is significant common council actions. Carrie?
Council approved the following. A resolution authorizing closing of the sale of property at 4200 East Lake Vista Boulevard and 4001 East Lake Vista Parkway to F Street OCLV LLC pursuant to the real estate purchase agreement, and a resolution approving the infrastructure development agreement between the City of Oak Creek and F Street OCLV LLC for Lakeshore Commons. Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Carrie. That will get us to item 5, which is Board of Housing and Zoning Appeals actions. There were none to date. Item 6 is our quarterly Parks, Recreation, and Forestry Commission actions. Our next report will be given to us on October the 26th, everybody.
There's a typo in the presentation. It should be the 26th.
I'm sorry, did I miss it? Did I? Oh, okay. Now get us to item 7, and that is public hearing of a sign appeal. For a canopy on behalf of Citco, located at 150 West Wasson Avenue. So, Laurie, would you like to read that in the record?
Published September 15th, 2021, City of Oak Creek, notice of public hearing before the Plan Commission. This meeting will be held in person and by video conference. Persons wishing to participate in the video conference must register via the website prior to the meeting. The video conference will begin at 5:55 p.m. to allow participants to log in. Persons who wish to view the meeting live without participating may visit the City of Oak Creek YouTube page at the website provided. Persons requiring other reasonable accommodations may contact the city at 414-766-7000. Requests should be made as far in advance as possible, preferably a minimum 48 hours. This is a public hearing for a sign appeal, which will be held September 28th, 2021, 6 p.m. at the Common Council Chambers and via Zoom. The appellant is Neil Jarman from Canopy B. The text key number is 734-9026-000. The property location is 150 West Rawson Avenue. This is a request for a variance from section 17.0706I3, which states that gasoline or service stations may provide one ground or pole sign displaying the name of the station and the brand and price of gasoline sold. They are also allowed one wall sign per street frontage, may also be provided. If granted, the variance would allow the applicant to install 4 wall signs on the gas pump canopy. Zoning of the property is B4 Highway Business District. All interested persons wishing to be heard are invited to be present. Dated the 7th day of September 2021. Plan Commission, City of Oak Creek, Wisconsin. Mayor Dan Bukevich, Chairman. This is a public hearing. All those wishing to speak, please step up to the podium, or for those participating remotely, can press *9 on your phone to notify the moderator that you would like to be unmuted. Please state your name and address for the record and address all questions and comments to the Plan Commission. This hearing is now open.
Thank you, Laurie. As Laurie stated, we will make 3 calls. This will be the first call. Anybody wishing to speak, please approach the podium. Name and address, please.
Adele Hamden, and home address is 4481 West Victory Creek Drive, Franklin, Wisconsin. And I was just wondering if anybody had any questions about it or anything. I'm unfamiliar with these procedures.
Okay.
So.
Well, we're glad you came up. Usually there may be a question for the applicant. We'll bring you back up at that time. And if you could just repeat your name when you come up, we'd appreciate that.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll now make the second call. Anybody wishing to speak? Third and final call. Okay, we will now close the public hearing and go on to item 8A, which is consideration of that sign appeal. And Lori, if you'd like to give us a synopsis.
Sure. This is a pretty cut and dry canopy sign replacement. The gas station has been, is changing names to Citgo. So it will be replacing three signs, three sides of the canopy, and the other side of the canopy facing the building will just be changing the vinyl. The building is fronting two different roads. This is Howell and Rawson. And as you can see, this is design. And then the second page is just some more of the fine detail of the LED illumination channel letters. Oh.
Okay, thank you, Lori. We'll now open it up to the commissioners for questions. We'll start with my left. Christine?
Nothing here, thank you.
Matt?
I have no questions, thank you.
Don?
Nothing for me.
Greg?
No questions or concerns.
Chris?
Nothing for me, thank you.
Don?
Nothing for me.
Fred?
For Fred.
Chauncey?
I do have a question for Lori. In our notes, it was identified that the applicant had questions on why this was considered a wall sign. So could you provide a little more information to the applicant?
Sure, we've discussed this with the applicant after we received the narrative, so we've discussed this at length. And he is aware that this is what their sign code states, and while he may not agree with it, but unfortunately, we do have to follow our code.
Okay. And then I do have a question for the applicant.
Oh, come on up to the podium, please.
Adele Hamden again, yes.
My question is, as of today, there are signs on each side already, so this will just replace the existing signs?
Well, there's panels on all sides,
Okay.
and two of the side, there was only one Phillips 66 sign that was facing Rawson Avenue. That was the only sign, but we just removed that since we're not a Phillips 66 anymore. But so only one side had a sign on it.
Okay. And so another question for Lori. So the sizes of the signs, is each size compliant to the size of the wall, or?
Yes, it's compliant because it matches what the canopy dimensions are.
Okay.
And so nothing exceeds the height of the
Please
canopy.
repeat that last part.
Sure, so there is no sign that exceeds the height of the canopy.
Thank you. No more questions.
I myself have none, as Lori stated. This is pretty cut and dry, and we've seen this couple other places throughout the city recently, so pretty easy one. If there's no more discussions or questions, motion, please.
Oldani moves the staff, excuse me, wrong one. Oldani moves that the Plan Commission approve sign variances allowing the installation of 4 illuminated wall signs on the gas pump canopy, 2 at 25 by 4 feet and 2 by 100 by 4 inches. And it should be feet. On the property southeast side of the building located at 150 West Rawson Avenue.
Seifert seconds.
Roll call, starting with Commissioner Sullivan.
Sullivan, aye.
Lorick, aye. Kokavich, aye.
Kuzikowski, aye. Oldani, aye.
Seifert, aye.
Chandler, aye.
And I.
All right, thank you. Good luck. Thank you. That will get us to 8B, and that is considerations and review of conditions and restrictions for a request submitted by Jessica Guzman, F Street Development Group, Edison M. Borkey Family Trust, and the City of Oak Creek to rezone and to establish a traditional neighborhood development planned unit development on the portions of the property at 4001 East Lake Vista Parkway, 9300 South Fifth Avenue, and 4200 East Lake Vista Boulevard. Carrie.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. As was stated, this was recommended for review at the September 14th meeting, and the Plan Commission determined that this should be recommended for common council approval. The proposal is to rezone portions of these parcels to traditional neighborhood development PUD. CSM dividing these properties and combining them in a certain way. That was approved in April of 2021 and will be recorded shortly. And additional reviews, should this PUD proceed, will be required. So to refresh everybody's memory, this is the concept development plan for Lakeshore Commons. We've seen these images in presentations previously. So I'm going to move through these very quickly. These are the proposed amenities throughout the site and the proposed development plans going from single family all the way up to multifamily in different configurations for a total of approximately 717 units. This is not in your packets. This is late breaking news, if you will. The materials package has been slightly altered. Hearing the Plan Commission's and staff's concerns regarding the vinyl siding that was proposed, that has been removed, and the request is for composite siding. This composite siding system that has been proposed is slightly different than what we've seen in the city before, but it is comparable and an alternative to both fiber cement and vinyl siding. It's actually a very new material, recently award-winning, as I'm told. The way that it is adhered to the side is actually via nails. It's a complete system that has a composite that is a proprietary mix of materials that includes PVC, glass, and or kind of a plastic material that gives the sheen and the exterior over a kind of an insulating material. So it's one big system like fiber cement, but it's lighter. The installation is a little bit different, so that's what's being proposed here. Additionally, the signage that's shown here, those would be coming back to the Plan Commission for master sign plan review. Also new, that is not in your packets, were the fence diagrams. At the previous meeting, we discussed some of the single family and multifamily villa concepts would have the option for side and rear yard fencing. This is giving the specific locations for where these fences can occur, should they be chosen by those not landowners, but unit owners. They will not be allowed anywhere else except for these specified areas for each of the concept plans. So if we're turning now to conditions and restrictions, they are quite lengthy. They're a little bit different than what we're used to, and that's because this is a brand new type of PUD. So this is very specific to traditional neighborhood development PUD and specific to Lakeshore Commons. So while I anticipate that there will be discussion and questions regarding these things, I'm not going to go over everything, but I will let you know where everything is. So all of section 1 are the required plans and submissions that will be required for the PUD itself going through the process. So all of the plans that we would normally see, all of the requirements for submissions are spelled out in section 1. Particularly 1, 2, and 3 family villas will not have to come back to the Plan Commission for individual unit reviews. However, the Plan Commission will be asked to rule on or vote on the concept packages for each of these. So the way that works is you will be looking at an overall concept, a model, kind of like what we did for mod homes, but the individual units will not have to come back like the multifamily would normally. Everybody understand? Okay, good. I wanted to make sure that I'm clear on that. So for every phase of the PUD, they will have to submit all of the normal plans that we would normally see. Any new buildings or additions that would be commercial or multifamily in nature above 3 units would require Plan Commission review. And that's for architectural plans as well. Section 1.0. If there are any future land divisions that will require subdivision, condo plat, and or CSM, that would have to go through the normal process through and have to comply with all deed restrictions and all statutory requirements, as well as any state reviews and requirements from such agencies as DNR. P goes into that condo plat and deed restriction, which is required to come to the city for review per section or per chapter 14.42 of the municipal code. And also the Plan Commission shall approve the declaration of condo and condo bylaws in section Q. If there are any questions with section 1, now would be the time to discuss that. Otherwise, we will proceed with section 2. And we can always come back to section 1 if you see something.
commissioners? Does anybody have anything off the top of their head, or we'll let Carrie continue on with section 2?
Okay. So section 2 specifies the specific development and design standards. So we're talking about where all of the residential units can occur, what the sizes are, what the setback requirements are. Actually, we'll get into that in a little bit. Conditional uses, density requirements, and then the areas that are required within the PUD itself, such as mixed-use areas, open space and neighborhood amenities, where your stormwater management are, your block standards, which are very general, parking standards for circulation. We'll get into parking requirements in a little bit. Your pedestrian, bicycle, and motor vehicle circulation. These are really sections that are taken from the TND PUD code sections. So there's really no difference between what is required by the TND PUD code and what is in here. It's kind of like our boilerplate. Now going into the parking and driveway requirements, skipping over the street hierarchy, under section J, this is where we have the specifications for each of the unit types and what the parking requirements will be. Excuse me. So single-family, multifamily, and villas and multifamily townhomes are required to have 2 attached spaces. Now, each of them has a 2-car garage, and I believe there's also an option for a 3-car garage in some instances. Multiple family buildings, so those traditional multifamily buildings that are in excess of 3, so 4 or more, shall provide a minimum of 1.4 dedicated parking spaces per dwelling unit. Design intent to include as many stalls as possible provided within an enclosed or attached garage within a reasonable vicinity of the dwelling unit. And then finally, a contingent parking plan shall be provided as part of those precise detailed plans as required in section 1H. The rest of this section goes on to give basically what the code requirements are in terms of how parking stalls are oriented, what the widths should be. Parking for bicycle areas should be in conformance with NACTO standards. If you don't know what NACTO is, it's kind of the gold standard for bicycle parking and for kind of the just the overall design for parking systems for bicycles. Driveway requirements, landscape areas for the parking areas, and also parking lot screening requirements are mentioned in this section. Finally, in this section, we have single-family and attached multifamily villa fencing requirements. So these are those diagrams that were just shown regarding where those private fences will be allowed. They're in the rear yards, optional at the time that the single-family unit and the attached multifamily villa units are going to be sold. Those fence areas are not variable, meaning that they have to comply with those specific areas that have been identified, as mentioned previously. But in general, they shall be a minimum of 3 feet from the rear yard alley line and should extend no more than 55 feet from the alley line. So any deviations from that will be brought to the Director of Community Development for consideration. Anything that would be greater than what the director would be able to modify would come back to the Plan Commission. Fence materials shall meet the T&D requirements. Are there any questions with section 2?
The fencing, so the material can vary, the type of fence, the look of the fence can vary unit to unit, or will it be a standard?
My understanding is that they are going to be provided with a standard. So even though the fence materials, as stated, says that they shall comply with the code requirements, in practicality, since they will be installed by the developer, it will likely be one type of material and one style, and the consultants can correct me if I'm wrong.
I got a thumbs up there, so we're good.
Thanks, Katie.
I do have a question about the fencing.
Yes.
So if one home picks a fence in the back, does the home right next to it have to have a fence in the back, or can it be in any location? Is there a system identified to have a continued flow of what you all are looking for?
That's a good question, but since it's optional, it doesn't necessarily mean that every single unit, just because one person chooses to have a fence, will have a fence. Now, there may be some coordination with those units that are attached. Maybe there will be some kind of coordination amongst each of the owners to say, hey, this section is going to be fenced. It might be cohesive if all of them have the fence, but it is an option. Exactly how that's going to be handled is something that the developer can answer.
And the developer provide a little more information?
Good evening, Steve Morales, 756 North Milwaukee Street. Yes, so the fences are going to be governed by the way the developer set up basically packages of fences. And if one homeowner was to put a fence in their option, the next homeowner essentially would be a continuation of that fence. Should they choose to provide that or exercise the option to purchase the fence, they would be essentially the reason why it's being limited to the design and style of it is so that there is cohesiveness and so that one system can pick up after another so it doesn't look like a hodgepodge of fences.
Okay, thank you.
Welcome.
I have a question on the fencing also. Are you trying to standardize the fencing throughout the whole concept so that you don't start having different patterns and different types of fencing?
Correct. That is the intent. Yes.
So if one puts it in, then you're going to have the rest of them follow, correct?
Correct. I believe there's 2 options total for the types of fences, but that is it. There would not be a variety. The whole point is to standardize and make them systems that can work with each other to make sure that it is a clean look and they're very maintainable.
Thank you.
More follow-up, I guess, to the fencing. At the last commission meeting, there was a lot of discussion, concern about snow removal and storing it back there. Does the rear fence at all cut off a portion of where snow is supposed to be stored, or would it still be stored behind the fence?
It would still be stored behind the fence. That is why there's a minimum too for the fence to be set back off of the alley line for exactly that purpose.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
If there are no further questions in section 2, we'll move on to section 3 and we can always go back. Section 3 is specific to architectural standards, and in section A specifically it calls out the materials. Now, as previously mentioned, the materials were slightly updated to include that composite siding system as opposed to the high-quality vinyl that had previously been flagged. So for single-family, multifamily, and townhomes, basically everything that is on the screen would be acceptable for the high-quality materials. So stone, brick, burnished block, commercial-grade architectural metal panel, wood, fiber cement, plank or panel, stucco, photovoltaic, engineered wood systems, phenolic cladding system, the composite siding system. So this is a change from what is listed in your packets, and wood look aluminum metal plank system. The multifamily buildings and clubhouse would essentially have the exact same materials with the exception of the composite siding system. They're not proposing that for any of those buildings. It also identifies the locations of where high quality materials versus accent materials could be, gives examples of what those accent materials would be, including exposed concrete, fritted glazing, translucent materials, corrugated metal panel, and metal and or vinyl trim and fascia. There are references to exhibits. They are not included in your packets, but we do have those diagrams. If anybody wants to see them, we can certainly bring them up. The remainder of this section goes into kind of the composition of the buildings themselves, so scale, height, depth, massing, where the glass is going to be most appropriate. So along the first floor facades, we are going to be looking for most of the glazing to occur for those multifamily or mixed-use kind of buildings. There is not a specific percentage requirement that's listed in these conditions and restrictions. But it allows us a little bit more flexibility than what we've seen with Drexel Town Square, for example, where we have this minimum and we often have to work with the consultants and the applicants to make sure that all of the components of the tenant space are kind of directed around that. And oftentimes we have to make some exceptions to the glazing. So rather than having that minimum requirement in the PUD itself, we do refer back to the code, and that gives us a little bit of flexibility. Are there any questions with section 3?
I do have a question for the applicant in regards to the materials. So with the materials, are they all being selected or identified for the outside of the different locations? Or the individuals that will own or rent the area, can they pick what these materials look like?
Yeah, there is a Steve Rallison, 56 North Milwaukee. Yes, there are basically a set of options pulled together in advance to ensure that high quality nature of those materials, and where the occupants will have options to choose is whether or not they want to upgrade some of those materials to all materials within the same palette that Gary just went through.
So those materials that they can select are inside and outside?
Correct. Less on the inside, but there will be some options on the inside as well as the outside, yes.
So if there is a unit that may be attached to another, so will there be consistency similar to the fence? If one material is chosen for one unit, the next unit will have fewer options?
Now, fewer options. What we've done is, in part of addressing that concern, is that's why we've put together these kind of preset packages to make sure that they're complementary to each other, as well as done things within the architecture to make sure that there's clean breaks between materials, so it doesn't look like one material simply runs into another. There's been architectural elements incorporated to make sure that we have high quality representation of the materials, that they're complementary to each other, that whatever option would be selected would look good next to the other one.
Thank you.
Welcome.
Also, Steve.
Thank you.
Section 4 is relatively short. It's the landscape standards. Essentially, for the PUD, there is going to be a requirement for a master landscape plan to be brought to the Plan Commission. Lighting standards in section 5, kind of the same thing, must meet code. Are there any questions with these two sections before we move on to signs? Okay, so section 6 regards the signs. Now, we have some concepts for the signage here. I did not include the upgraded images that show kind of the anticipated landscaping around them, but they will be there. The master sign plan will be brought back to the Plan Commission to identify and approve the locations of the master development signs and these secondary signs as well. Wayfinding signs are specified in here as having a specific maximum size. And multifamily buildings of 4 or more units, mixed-use buildings, clubhouse, amenity spaces, etc., would be part of that master sign package to be brought back to the Plan Commission for review and approval. Are there any questions on signs? Okay, section 7 is maintenance and operation. Generally, it states the same things that we have in other PUDs, so snow storage, specific to this PUD, will be handled by the developer, the off-site removal, the snow storage for those private areas. That'll all be handled by the condo association. The removal of the snow on the public streets will still be handled by the city, but of course the sidewalks will be handled by the developer. Solid waste collection units, those garbage and recycling containers need to be in locations that are approved by the Plan Commission, and the requirements for removal and servicing of those areas is going to be by the developer. This will not be city provided. And finally, the maintenance of stormwater stormwater management and green infrastructure facilities will be the responsibility of the property owner unless otherwise agreed to and documented by the city. There are some areas where the city will be taking on responsibility, but most of the areas will be by the developer. Any questions with section 7?
The individual units have their own garbage carts, similar to other residential homes?
Actually, we can see a little bit of that in the fence diagram. There is a suggested area for trash and a suggested buffer area at the rear. So that would be facing the alleyway.
And I guess my question is, I agree that it looks much nicer when that's screened, but in existing residential homes, we're not screening them. I guess what's the rationale to have these single-family residential? I understand multifamily with a large dumpster, but having these single-family homes, screening it versus every other home in Oak Creek not.
Well, actually, it's a suggested planted buffer, so it would be something that we would be asking for. It gives a designated area so we don't have bins that are necessarily all over the place. It kind of gives you a little bit of a quarantined area, if you will, or a dedicated area, if you will. I don't think it's necessarily something that we're going to be asking for, but it also keeps that area for snow storage open and designates that there too. We aren't requiring individual like fencing or any kind of that type of screening for such a thing.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, moving on to section 8, which is time of compliance. And this is something that I mentioned at the last Plan Commission meeting, a little bit different than what we normally see. So the way that this is structured is that the PUD is going to be requiring the installation or construction of public infrastructure and amenities for phase 1 within 12 months from the date of the adoption of the ordinance. Phase 1 infrastructure, public infrastructure and amenities must be completed and building permits issued for the initial structures within 48 months from the date of adoption. Subsequent phases and the timing for those phases would then be prescribed in the purchase and sale agreement or finance development agreement. So basically it's stating that once you get beyond phase 1, which will have the majority of the infrastructure and the amenities, then we have to be a little bit more flexible because we do have those individual units that will be sold, not the land, but the units will be sold. So that's giving a little bit of an option for how that next phasing will be presented. And of course, if there are any concerns with the compliance provisions, applicant has the option to reapply for PUD approval prior to recommencing work or construction. Are there any questions with section 8?
I do have a question. Can you review the two different time frames again to identify what's different with the two?
Certainly. Phase 1 public infrastructure and amenities must start within 12 months of the approval, and they need to be completed with certificates of occupancy within 48 months before they can move on to the next phase.
Okay, so the second part identifies that everything needs to be in place, but then individuals have that opportunity to move in the next 4 years?
No, building permits issued for the initial structures would have to be within 48 months. So they have anywhere up to 48 months to get building permits.
Oh, okay. Okay, thank you.
Okay, section 9, just other regulations. One thing to point out is that impact fees will apply to the development just like any other subdivision or any other multifamily PUD. And we do have a compliance with all other regulations, approvals, permits from other agencies that are involved. Any question with section 9? Okay. Section 10 might be a little bit confusing, and it's certainly new to what we have seen in other PUDs. Because of the nature of the proposed PUD, because of the moving parts, the multiple phases within this, the fact that it is a condo unit, we wanted to kind of clarify what the requirements would be should this proceed regarding the proposal for any variations from chapter 14, which is the subdivision chapter, what the requirements are for certified survey maps, development agreements, PUD requirements, infrastructure development, and the commencement of the infrastructure installation, preliminary, final, and condominium plat requirements, and conditions prior to issuing a building permit, as well as certificates of occupancy. Rather than going through all of that process, I will just ask if there are any questions. This does state that there will be plat requirements that will be coming before the Plan Commission, but the sequencing of that is spelled out in this section. And I will give just a little bit of a heads up. This does require a condominium plat, which we've not really seen much in the past. That would be combined with final plat likely.
Any questions?
I do have a question. So when you say the plats will be brought back to commission, can you provide a little more information on that? On what it looks like, on who can reside, or the types of individuals that will be in those properties? What does that look like?
Well, actually, this is just getting into the subdivision and the condominium plat requirements. So it's not saying, it's not identifying who goes where necessarily. What it will do is subdivide the property itself, and then the condominium plat will further subdivide the units. So it's a little bit difficult to understand until you see something in a diagram, honestly. I'm a visual person, so that's the way I see it. But basically, it would have to go through the normal subdivision plat, and at final plat, we would also review the condominium plat. The reason that we have to do the condominium plat separate from the subdivision plat is nuanced, but we do have to do it that way. Due to the installation of public roads and infrastructure, it kind of further divides the properties in ways that we can't use certified survey maps. So that's why a plat is required, because the roads effectively subdivide the properties. The condo plat identifies where each of the individual units will be and what the common ownership is for the condo itself. The entire PUD will be condoized. I see some confusion. Is there anything I can do to help kind of clarify that? It's tricky. We went through this for about 2 hours in a meeting one day, multiple times.
I'm glad you guys did.
Took us a while.
No, this is different. We haven't done a lot of condos here for a number of years, so a little bit different, but because of private ownership, they do have to get platted. Does that sum it up enough? I mean,
I think maybe just to think of it in terms of no one individual unit owner is going to own any dirt or any land. That's all going to be held by the association and the owners, but essentially everything above that is the ownership of the individual. And that's why the condominium plat, or the subdivision plat, when it comes back to you, you won't see necessarily the units on there, or you won't see anything that looks like lots. It'll just be the blocks. But within that, they'll do individual condominium plats that further subdivide that into those kind of ownership, not requirements, but the way that the condos and the ownership are going to be spelled out based on the general development plan.
Thank you.
very well said, Doug. You know, a little different because you're sitting on land here, but if you think about downtown, there's condos going up. So, you know, they just plat out the building, but there's individual ownership going on there. So, okay, anything else? That it for you, Carrie? Done? Or you got?
If there are no further questions on the conditions and restrictions as proposed, and I do realize that you did not have the exhibits that were listed in here, we can move on. The applicant does have a presentation if there are any questions, although most of the information has been presented in what we've just spoken about.
I do have one additional question.
Sure.
In regards to Section 2J, in regards to parking,
Yes.
And there's a bullet point here about contingent parking. So is that a requirement or is it optional? This is the second bullet point under I. Or the first
If I
one.
may, perhaps. Parking as was identified at the initial recommendation stage has been something, a bit of a discussion with the developers and between the city. And typically, our standard Chapter 17 code language requires a set amount of parking, right? It's one space per one bedroom unit, 1.5 for two, and then 2 spaces. Gotcha. See, Carrie knows this much better than I do.
1.5 for a single, 2 for 2, 2.5 for 3 and above.
But we also recognize that it's never the city's or the developer's intent to build more parking than we actually need. So that, right, so there's the balance, right? You want to have enough parking, but you don't have too much parking. So the 1.4 minimum standard that you see in this PUD is that it's a minimum. And we have been working with the developers, with the owners, and it clearly is their intent to provide more than that. And we would certainly encourage that based on some of the concerns that have been expressed by this commission and by staff. However, the good thing is, and as Commissioner Chandler pointed out, I mean, that we have a couple of kind of checkpoints in this. And after those first 3 buildings are developed, I mean, we'll have an opportunity to say, hey, is this working? Did we get that right? And if we didn't, we'll have an opportunity to take a look at that for future multifamily buildings and adjust that if need be. And typically that's where that additional space for parking or contingent parking would be within the future phases of the multifamily.
Okay, thank you.
And just a further clarification, it does say that shall be provided. So this is akin to whenever we get a site plan that shows future parking designated on the site plan, if that helps to clarify.
Yes, thank you.
I remember the last time I looked around and said, wow, there's just too much parking. It just doesn't seem to ever exist. So
It's happened.
Okay.
The 2 times of the year where you don't see that's an issue are Black Friday and just around Christmas. Otherwise, you can definitely see where the abundance of parking is.
Right.
Okay. Carrie, you said the applicant's going to do a presentation for us? No?
We don't. Gary's done a wonderful job covering everything.
Okay.
Happy to answer any questions.
I'm glad to hear that feedback for our staff. Perfect. So, before we move on, is there any other questions? I know it's a lot going on here. It's very different, but it's a very well-constructed PUD, and believe me, staff and the applicants have been working long and hard at this because it's very challenging property and something very new, not only to Oak Creek, but kind of to the whole southeast area. So I'm kind of proud of what's going on here. But if there's questions, we'll take them now.
For section 2B conditional uses, is that similar to existing residential neighborhoods? I guess I'm curious as to item II or 2, lodging uses. Does lodging uses include anything like Airbnb or Verbo, or is that a lodging?
Yes.
And would that then be the responsibility of the homeowner to get a conditional use, or would the developer apply for that?
It's a good question. I don't think we've thought that far ahead, but should that happen, we would probably require the condominium association to at least provide a letter of support or be a co-applicant in that case. As far as the allowances, because it's a traditional neighborhood development, it's not all residential. So this allows for a mix of uses that would normally happen within a residential neighborhood. So you've got your neighborhood commercial, if that were to happen, your neighborhood restaurant or neighborhood grocery store, neighborhood service. You might also have a small scale hotel or something akin to a lodging like that. That may not happen in the phases that we see. It may be in a future phase that we've not planned for yet, which would require a PUD amendment perhaps. So this is setting the groundwork to allow for a range of uses. It doesn't necessarily mean that we're expecting them.
Keep in mind, if it's the condo, usually the association fees will lay the ground rules for that as well.
Yes, the declaration will further restrict, in some cases, things that we're not putting in here, things that we wouldn't necessarily be allowed to restrict that a developer or a landowner could. Lodging uses, like I said, more likely in a future phase if that moves forward. Otherwise, one of the buildings that would be kind of like your commercial or your small scale placeholder for a mixed right now might change over to something that might incorporate lodging, but it's not anticipated. I shouldn't say anticipated, I should say expected.
Okay. Fred?
I got one question about the bicycle path and the sidewalks, the sharing of those. I see a potential problem with some of that if it's not properly marked and identified.
So
there are to combine the two. I think you do want to try to separate as much as you can.
So some of the sidewalks along the streets are going to be separate from the pathways that go through the development. And the pathways that go through the development are multimodal. So correct me if I'm wrong, but they're about 8 to 10 feet in width. So that's a typical multimodal path. So you have, that allows for passing on both sides. And those paths that are through the development, they will be signed.
Thank you.
And that multi-purpose path is really what we put in along Drexel, correct? Yeah.
The width, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it may not look like your traditional sidewalk. It may look like an asphalt path, but it will be wide enough for folks to pass on either side.
Yeah. And if there's no further discussions, questions, we'll look for a motion.
Lorick moves to recommend to the Common Council. Lorick moves to recommend that the Common Council adopt the conditions and restrictions as part of the traditional neighborhood development planned unit development request submitted by Jessica Guzman, F Street Development Group, Edison M. Berkey Family Trust, and the City of Oak Creek for portions of the properties at 4001 East Lake Vista Parkway, 9300 South 5th Avenue, 4200 East Lake Vista Boulevard.
Guzekowski will second.
Roll call, beginning with Commissioner Carrillo.
Carrillo, aye.
Lorick, aye.
Kavich, aye.
Guzekowski, aye.
Aldani, aye.
Seifert, aye.
Chandler, aye. Anna, aye.
Sullivan, aye. Great, thank you. Thank you to staff and thank you to the applicants. There's a lot to work through and a lot to get ready to go, so we really appreciate it. Appreciate the partnership and congratulations. That is a lot of work. Scott,
Thank you.
you got anything you guys want to say anything before you leave, or you just want to saunter on out of here?
Thank you, everybody, for your commitment to working with us.
Appreciate it, Steve. Okay, that will get us to item 8C, and that is a rezone. Review a request to rezone the property at 9571 South 15th Avenue from RS3 Single Family Residential to A1 Limited Agriculture to A1 Limited Agricultural, but there will be no change to the floodway or the flood fringe. Carrie, are you ready or no?
I am, but unfortunately my slides are not advancing.
You want me to keep talking for a little? I can stall for a little bit.
A little song and dance, please.
Oh, you don't want to see that. You don't want to see that. There'll be just a second.
Yeah, let me try one thing here.
Oh, come on up. Rich, would you like to?
Yeah, while Carrie's
Yeah.
searching for the slide.
Sure. Rich, for the record.
Sure, Rich Dukniak, 3rd District Alderman, City of Oak Creek, 1035 East Stonegate Drive, Oak Creek, Wisconsin. In regard to this rezone request, I had been contacted by the property owner to discuss, I guess, some of the details why they're seeking the request. That should be contained within your packet because Carrie had been in touch with the landowner as well via email, and I believe there's a pretty good the explanation as to why the property owner is asking for that rezone. After reviewing that email, the telephone conversation that I had with the landowner was consistent with the explanation that was provided in the email. Secondly, there were two residents, one in that 9571 South 15th Avenue area that had some questions / concerns. The questions I was unable to answer, so I'm hoping that individual, is that resident here this evening? Okay, they are here this evening. Would they be given the opportunity to come up and ask questions?
Certainly.
Okay. And then an adjacent property owner had questions about the proposed rezone as well. So Del would be welcome to again answer, or excuse me, ask any questions about the recommendations on the report, and maybe have some questions of the property owner as well. Thank you.
Thanks for the background, Rich.
Sure.
Appreciate it. Carrie, are you ready?
Yes, it looks like we have the slides back up. So
Okay.
as mentioned, Mr. Mayor, thank you very much. The current zoning is RS3, A1, floodway and flood fringe. There would be no changes to those flood areas as part of this proposal. Part of it is already zoned A1, so the request is to zone everything outside of those flood areas as A1 to be consistent. No utilities serve this property currently. The utilities that are present are not in any way close to this property, honestly. There's nothing in 15th Avenue and there's nothing in Ryan Road that would be readily available without extending those utilities. From what we understand from the property owner, there's some question as to whether or not there are portions of the property that would support on-site systems, which is why the request for agricultural is coming forward to the Plan Commission partially. The property does surround some existing homes. As you'll note, it kind of, for lack of a better term, looks like a donut. It does go around existing properties, and these properties are served by a road or an access point that actually goes through this property to serve those other homes. So that's a little bit unique for this particular property, other than the unique shape of the parcel. It is also located within a environmental corridor that we'll talk about. But first, the comprehensive plan. While there are some parcels in the area that are consistent with the proposed zoning, RS3 to the northeast and southeast, floodway in the area that we noticed before. My slides are not advancing again. There's also agriculture to the south and west. I'm just going to proceed. The comprehensive plan identifies this area as being appropriate for preservation of those floodway areas and also for single-family detached. However, since this is not an area or a particular property that can be served by utilities, public utilities at this point, and there's some question as to whether or not the property will support an on-site system, the recommendation in the report is that agricultural purposes would be appropriate if and until such time as the property can be served by either public utilities or on-site systems. The only other category that would be appropriate until such time as that can be developed would be preservation. But there are some preservation issues that would either be, for a certain time frame or in perpetuity. So that's something that the landowner would have to consider if they were to present that. The purpose of the A1 district is that it is to provide for the continuation of general farming and related uses in those areas of the city that are not yet committed to urban development. Again, there's no public utilities available to serve this. It is further the intent of the district to protect lands herein from urban development until their orderly transition into urban-oriented districts is required. So while a portion of the property is already zoned A1, the request again is to rezone the remainder outside of flood areas for agricultural purposes. This does not relieve the applicant of pursuing or identifying on-site wetlands, which would have to either be preserved, or if there are any fill areas proposed that would have to go through and obtain approvals from the DNR potentially. The remainder of the property would also have to comply with setback requirements per the A1 district, and also remain outside of flood areas per code. So any development, greenhouse, pole barn, other structures, would also be impacted by the environmental corridors in the area. This is an identification of certain areas by sewer pack that promote diversity of species, that identify areas for, there's a lot of criteria, but basically they've identified certain areas where these environmental corridors would be protected from development in a way where, I'm not really saying this properly, basically public utilities would not be able to be installed to serve development of a property on which an environmental corridor has been identified, with a caveat that sewer pack would have to be involved with that particular development to kind of hammer out the details to determine whether or not a change to the corridor would be in order. So anything that happens on this property has a lot of eyes on it, is the long and short. As was mentioned, there is an email included in your packet that states what the request for the use of the property is. The plan is to plant Wisconsin native plants. There are currently old growth hickory and oak trees that they plan to use the seeds to grow more of the trees. There is a plan for fruit trees, and the plan also includes planting and growing more of the pollinator type plants to support butterfly populations and other insects. There could be the incorporation of beehives on the property, which would also have to meet setback requirements. Also, potentially a greenhouse would be proposed on the property. We would have to go through the local and state reviews for such. There's a plan to restore a portion of the native pond that was filled in, potentially have chickens, and potentially a pole barn. There is no comprehensive plan that has been provided other than this email. So any buildings, any development would have to come back to at least staff and probably the Plan Commission, and potentially go through the state in order to obtain approvals. Again, there may be wetlands on the property. There may be other areas that would have to be reviewed and approved by other agencies before any development could occur. With that in mind, there is a suggested motion for approval outside of the floodway and flood fringe districts on the screen for consideration. Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Carrie. That was quite a bit, and we're going to get some more details. But before we go to the commission, if there are people in the audience who would like to come up and speak, as Alderman Dukniak had mentioned, please come up and state your name and address, and ask your question, and we'll try to ask it timely or whatever your point of view may be. So you're welcome to come up. And if you don't all want to come at once, we can go to the commission. You can come up when you feel like it. That's okay. But if you feel it's more important to hear the opinions up here first and then speak, it's up to you.
Delany Road, 3121 East Ryan Road, Oak Creek, Wisconsin. My property is just north of the property that we're talking about here.
Sorry, I'm going to move the microphone because I'm not sure you didn't pick up.
Should I take my mask off?
I don't think you have to, but just.
Okay. One of the biggest concerns that I have, and I'm wondering if the commission is aware of this, how this property came about. Many years ago, this property was it was raised by having foundry sand put in there, and that's how this property was built. And I have a very large concern about, all the chemicals that would be in that foundry sand. And, and because of that, I don't think it should be used for any of the things that we're talking about here. I have always hoped over my lifetime that somebody eventually would purchase this property and clean it up and get all the foundry sand out of there. I don't know if that'll ever happen. I think it's become obvious that it's not going to happen in my lifetime, but I've always hoped that it would. I also have a concern about how this property is going to be used. I've been told, that junk is going to be stored in there, and I don't want to see something like that happen. I think we've got enough of a problem with the property that we have down on the corner of Pennsylvania and Old Bryan Road. And I don't want to see that happen here between my property and the other residents that are on the south side of this property. So that's because of those situations. I would be opposed to any rezoning of this property right now. And the other thing that I'm concerned about is I feel that the owner should be given the plan commission a much better idea of what he's actually planning on doing with this property. So those are my comments.
Okay, thank you. Just to address it very quickly with the sand, whether we have knowledge or not, whoever would buy this and develop it, whether R3 or whatever they wanted to put there, they would have to start out with a phase 1 environmental, wouldn't they, Doug? If it's suspected, and to see if there's anything there, and then they'd have to do their due diligence from there to clean.
Well, certainly for any proposals to develop in there, any potential owner would want to be aware of what their liability is with respect to this property. I think that from a planning perspective, it is shown again as primary environmental corridor. If you look at that map, there's very little, if any, area on this property that is not included in that corridor. So that, whether it's the floodplain or whether it's wetlands, this is not a situation where someone can go in there and just do what they want. The wise property owner in this case would investigate the opportunities available to them based on the current conditions. And so, it should not be a shock nor a surprise to any potential property owner that they may not be able to fulfill everything that they had envisioned for this property. And that's why, and Carrie said, well, although we've got some stated intentions from this property owner via email, there was no plan, not that the one is required, mind you, but in the interest of safeguarding this property owner's interests, I think to give them some comfort level, I think some more specifics as to their intentions for property would be appropriate. But having said that, A1 is the least intensive development category that we have aside from resource protection. And essentially, that resource protection element is carried through in the preservation of those environmental corridors. So, and, whether it's building something in RS3 or building something in A1, I think we've got those safeguards in place. To Mr. Nyrod's information that he provided, there's really nothing that the city can do to compel someone to clean that up. I suspect that it was has its DNR documentation. It's probably been closed at some point. But having said that, if you own the property, you are responsible for that. That goes, certainly there are nuances that go well beyond that. But from the city's perspective, looking at its comprehensive plan, certainly the presence of environmental corridors, wetlands, and the floodplains on this property make it such that it probably shouldn't be developed. And if there is ever a proposal to develop it, it will need to be worked very closely with the regulatory agencies to make sure that it does not adversely impact the resources on that property.
Thank you, Doug. And then, just storage would be addressed by zoning. So, anything they decided to do there illegally would be taken from the city. Yes, ma'am, if you'd like, you have to come up to the podium, please, and name and address.
Hi, my name is Diane Hoffman, and I live in the forest with the other neighbors. Okay, 3009 East Forest Lane, Oak Creek, 53154. The subject about the environment, that has been talked about with the family that homesteaded this forest. It's been talked about with Gary, and then we've all talked about it. In that area, even on my property, if you dig down too far, there's not just foundry sand like Del talk, there's tires, there's all sorts of things that people dumped in there, and I don't know who it is. And Gary had already said to me that that was their plan, to clean it all up. But environmentally, when you unearth those type of things, I used to be in hazmat for Wisconsin Gas. So when you unearth foundry sand, what do you have to include an environmentalist that would come in to do this, or can Gary just do that on his own?
No, that's a little above my pay grade to make a statement on. But I would really like to think that it has to be done properly, and I would imagine when the city has been involved in situations like that, it had to be a professional company that has to come in through city. So I don't know if it would change for a private resident. But don't hold me to that, because
Mayor,
I'm in no
may I
position
also
to say
suggest
that.
you to contact the DNR. They have several programs out there that can assist in those questions.
You know, this concerns me, and I'm just going to make this brief because it's not to do with this, but when that Lapine thing came forward, I used to come in here and I was involved in trying to stop the cement crushing thing. But when I did my research, it turned out there was a Supreme Court case that said that that water in the Pines area was supposed to be checked on by the DNR on a monthly basis, and it wasn't done once. So my concern is if the DNR would actually come in here and do something, because they didn't do that in that case.
Whether that happens after the cleanup, I don't think just because of the rezone, the DNR would get involved. But I could be wrong. It's usually after a cleanup situation.
Oh, they don't come in before to?
Not that I'm aware of.
Okay. I thought that's what Doug had said, something about that. So
no, I don't think they just randomly come out for things. It's been our experience. Like there was once a situation, somebody wanted to donate some land to the city. And we did a phase 1 environmental, and we turned out a bunch of stuff, just as you're describing, foundry sand. And
so anybody could just go in there and? Well,
the people, went back, we had aerial shots going back to the 60s, and you kind of see it over time kind of fill in that, over time somebody got stuck with the property and they wanted to donate it to the city, and basically we didn't touch it. We let it be. So. And that property, I believe, is still just sitting with everything buried under it. So,
well, it sounds like what they're planning to do with a greenhouse, and that doesn't sound like it would be unearthing anything anyway.
No,
so.
and something they would have to get the proper permitting and come through the city, and then our engineering department would get involved. So, I would trust. Okay. I would trust our city management to move in the right direction with that.
All right, thank you.
Anybody else like to speak before we go to the commission? Come on up.
I want to say one more thing. I need to give my name again.
Sure, why not?
Delnay Road, 3121 East Ryan Road.
Thank you.
One of the primary concerns with foundry sand is there's a ton of chemicals in it, but one of the biggest concerns is arsenic. And because of all of the foundry sand that was put into this property, that's got to be a big concern, I would think, for the city and the commission, because, that's a concern about how much arsenic is in your water. And, you have to be concerned about that, and that's why I've always hoped that someday it would get cleaned up. But if this rezoning gets passed, and then this guy starts building stuff in there, you know, you'll get to a point where you really can't do anything about it anymore.
Well, you know, I'll go back to Doug's statement. Going to A1 is probably the least impactful we could do to it, because most people in an A1 situation don't build very much. And I'll share with you an email. Carrie mentioned the email, and I'll just kind of read it into the record. When we originally received the application for the property at 9571 South 15th to go to A1 Limited Agriculture, we did not receive significant information as to the proposed use of the property. We asked for a brief narrative detailing plans for use of the property. Again, this doesn't affect the floodplains or the overlay districts or future road patterns or anything else required by code. And we received an email that was addressed to Carrie, and it said, "Hello, Carrie, we are big nature lovers. Property is ideal for the support of nature." This is their brief narrative, how they plan to use the property. They want to plant Wisconsin native plants. There are currently some old growth hickory and oak trees that they plan to use the seeds to grow even more trees. They plan to have a few fruit trees, and there's currently 2 patches of milkweed plants. They want to help grow and support butterfly population and other insects in the area. They would also at one time hope to have bees. And with the growth of the native plants with the milkweed, possibly a greenhouse. They plan to restore a portion of the native pond that was filled in if possible, and possibly a small pole barn. So, you know, it's things of that nature. Regarding that pole barn, that would have to come probably before this commission again. That's something that just doesn't pop up. So, you know, I don't want to argue it, but again, that's probably the least impactful than if somebody bought it at RS3 and decided to put a neighborhood in there. And they could do that, but then they'd be obligated to clean that up, which is the desire of probably everybody. But given the cost, it's probably cost prohibitive for what you're going to get out of the lots there. So, yes, Dale.
Yeah, I'd have a little bit of concern about that, because a number of years ago, when the original person bought that property, a street was created inside of the property, and an area was identified as the city as buildable for a residence. Do you remember that, Doug? Well, if you look at the map, that was sent out to everybody, and there's dotted lines on there which shows a street coming in off of Old Ryan Road. Mm-hmm. And that circled area is right beside that circle area is where the city gave the person.
You're correct. I see it, and it is a platted street.
Yeah.
But there again, it could be very cost prohibitive.
Just a correction, Mayor, it's not a platted street, it's an officially mapped street.
Thank you. Wrong verbiage from me. But as Doug said, that's pretty common on any land that we have throughout the city.
Okay, but at that time, the person who originally bought this property, he was given permission to build in that area. The reason nothing ever happened is because water and sewer would have had to been brought in from Old Ryan Road. And that's a long stretch on that little piece that's between my property and my next door neighbors. And nobody's going to pay what it would cost to run laterals in there from Old Ryan Road. It would cost a fortune to do that.
Right, that's why it's so cost prohibitive to develop the property.
Cost prohibitive.
And again, going back to Doug's statement, it's probably the least impactful if it stays A1.
Yeah.
Now, again, if, you know, in the future, if they want to take it to a conservatorship or something like that, that'd be up to them. But it's, you know, as staff reviewed it, it seemed to fit the bill to be A1 and not have anything on there and just kind of be land.
Yeah.
Because regardless of the condition of the land, the zoning ain't going to change condition of the land. It's so. Commissioners, I've been doing a lot of talking. I guess it's your turn. Commissioner Chandler, you got anything?
I do. Is the applicant available?
Good evening. My name is Gary Heft, 3020 East Forest Lane.
Can you provide a little more information on the plans for the property based on everyone?
I will give you guys a detailed plan, but I was asked just to give a brief thing now, but I plan on doing a detailed plan. I've been 40 years in construction, and Dell's right, that is filled in foundry sand. We have our water tested all the time. We have wells. I don't know about my other neighbors. The wells, the water there is perfect. There's no arsenic, there's none, we have it tested all the time. But I will put common council, I'll give you a detailed plan of what I plan on doing. I'd like to bring some elevations up, to bring some fresh dirt in there so I can plant some apple trees and some peach trees, and some native plants. The greenhouse and the pole barn's down the road, possibly next year. We're just trying to get some of this changed around to agricultural, so we're not paying so much taxes. The land is really not buildable. Like you said, it's filled in with a lot of garbage, a lot of stuff. And what I want to do, my green planting is out in the open, not where a lot of that stuff is on adjacent to Dell's, where that elevation is brought up. It's got to be 8 feet, and there's concrete. There's a lot of stuff in there, and we knew that when we bought it. But we might turn it into, like I said, a preserve. So we don't know, but we didn't want anyone putting a storage unit in there. We didn't want any of that happening. So that's why we bought it.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
Hang tight. Fred?
Oh, one quick question before we continue on. Carrie, I just want to make sure I understood this. So since it is an environmental corridor, utilities are not required?
Utilities are not available, and utilities would not be able to be brought to the property to serve a development such as single-family residential due to the presence of environmental corridors. Now, put an asterisk next to that because that's all something that would have to be coordinated with Sewer PAC. If it was to change, they would have to be a part of the review for any development of the property, but there's no plan for utilities to be brought to this property. Thank you.
Fred, anything?
Yeah, I have a question for Gary. Do you plan on cleaning up this property?
It would be back in the day when we first moved it. I looked into buying it prior to the original owner. They had money from super fund to do that kind of stuff. Now and more, there's that money. It would cost millions of dollars to clean that property up. I plan on keeping it as green as possible, doing as little impact on the land in the corridor, and have it still a nature area, but still grow some trees and some plants and some other things for, that I want to grow and sell or whatever I want to do with them. But I'm a big butterfly nature guy, and that would be, I have 2 gigantic, probably half acres of milkweed pods in there. And that's one of my big things I want to do for the butterflies, just to have it as a green space. And still have my pole barn and do some, you're going to have stuff to do there. I mean, move stuff, and you're going to need equipment and stuff to do a little bit of development on that land.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome.
My question would be for Carrie or Doug. What's the difference between keeping it zoned as is, where it already has the limited agriculture A1 to just limited agriculture?
The A1 portion is not significant in terms of, it's limited to one area of the property. It wouldn't necessarily allow for agricultural practices on the rest of the property where it's zoned RS3.
Okay, thank you.
Chris?
All my questions are answered.
Craig?
I don't have any questions. Thank you.
Don?
No, nothing additional.
Matt?
I guess my only question would be for Carrie, just for clarification. What can't they do on their plan under the current zoning?
They would not be allowed to build a pole barn. They would not be allowed to do a greenhouse. They would not be allowed to have agricultural animals. Planting plants you can do.
So they're limited to just vegetation?
Basically, yes.
How about bees?
Bees would not be allowed in a residential.
Okay.
And I would add, I mean, I share the plans and intentions of the property owner, and I think those are honorable. But I mean, you can't assume that you'll be able to fill. You can't assume that you'll be able to build. I mean, that's all got to be coordinated with the presence of wetlands and the impact that would have on the environmental corridor. So again, all things that sound great from the perspective of conserving open space and providing habitat. But I would not assume that you can just go and do that. I mean, there will be a process for that to happen.
Thank you, Doug.
Yes, I do have a question for the applicant. And probably Carrie as well.
Gary, have 3020 East Forest Lane.
So my question to you is, after all of that vegetation you're planning to bring to that parcel, how are you going to maintain it? Are you going to live on this property or are you going to live elsewhere?
I live adjacent to this property right now.
Okay, so you don't need to live.
Yeah, the property's adjacent to mine.
Okay, that's why I was confused, because if they're not allowed to have utility servicing this, then how are you going to be maintaining it? So,
It was in the donut hole.
see, I don't speak donuts, so I don't know. Yeah. Also, the access road, you said it's kind of a shared with other properties, so is it gonna be, is that, there's a like maintenance agreement between both?
It's existing. It's East Forest Lane.
Okay,
So that goes out to 15th Avenue and it serves the existing residences that are in the area, if you will.
so if he has like equipment going in and out, is there any restrictions, anything that will impact that roadway?
It's a private road.
We all share the easement on that road.
Okay.
So we've been all there for over 20 years, so we all pretty much have a good agreement on what we do.
Okay, good, so there's no gonna be
No, there's not.
issues or anything from that sort? Okay, that's all I have, thank you.
Yeah. From my perspective, I mean, I kind of talked a lot, and a lot of questions did get answered, and I think the two biggest takeaways here, I mean, it was great information Dell and neighbors shared, and it seems, Gary's well aware of the challenges, so anything they want to do there is going to come back to us in process anyway, as Carrie stated, pole barns, greenhouse, things of that nature. So I think we're in good shape. I think they were very honest about what they're trying to do. Now, whether they accomplish that, but part of it is getting the greater part of it in A1. It's economical. I mean, looking to reduce a little tax, and if we're doing the right thing and keeping things green, believe me, I hear it a lot that we don't keep things green enough here in Oak Creek at times. So this is kind of nice that I can actually say we're doing this. So I don't have an issue. I will trust our staff's recommendation with this. And again, if it ever comes to anything different, Carrie said a set of eyes will be on here from SWPAC to everybody else with much more knowledge than I have here. So with that, I'm fine with the rezone. So is there any other questions before I ask for a motion? Okay, seeing none, motion on 8C, please.
Oldani moves that the Plan Commission recommends to the Common Council that the property at 9571 South 15th Avenue be rezoned from RS3 Single Family Residential and A1 Limited Agriculture to A1 Limited Agriculture. No change to the floodway, floods fringe districts after a public hearing.
Seifert seconds.
Roll call, beginning with Alderman Lorik.
Lorik, aye.
Kavich, aye.
Guzekowski, aye.
Oldani, aye.
Seifert, aye.
Chandler, aye. And aye.
Sullivan, aye.
Grillo, aye.
Okay, thank you very much. Appreciate your patience. Thanks for coming out tonight, Rich. Appreciate it. Very helpful. Item 8D, consideration of conditional use, submitted by the University of Wisconsin Credit Union for conditional use for a financial institution with a drive-through facility on the property at 7902 South Main. Carrie, are you ready?
I am. Apologies for the technical difficulties this evening, but this is a conditional use permit request for this property. It is within Drexel Town Square. It is for a financial institution with drive-through facility. The drive-through facility, we'll see in a moment, is actually detached from the building itself. This property is within the mixed-use sub-district. It is at the entrance to Main Street, and the proposal includes a 6,000 square foot building. The concept plan is on the screen right now. You'll see in the middle of the parking lot, those are where the ITMs, those remote teller machines, are proposed to be located. It does show 3. There is a request for 4 lanes. However, that would be part of the site and building plan review should the conditional use permit move forward. They are anticipating a maximum of 12 employees on the site at any time. Hours of operation, the lobby would be open Monday through Friday and from 9 a.m. to 5:30. Saturday from 9 a.m. to 1 p.m. Sundays would be closed, but the ITMs would be accessed 24/7. The ITMs would act initially kind of like ATMs with video conferencing kind of capabilities potentially in the future. Parking is shown at 84 stalls. That is actually exceeding what the minimum requirement would be. Per the general development plan and regulating plan, 3.5 to 5 stalls per 1,000 gross square feet would be required for such a building, which would be about 14 to 20 stalls. And when you count in the maximum number of employees anticipated, that would be 26 to 32. However, it has always been identified that this particular lot and the lot across the street would be required to provide parking to serve the development as well as whatever is on the parcel. This proposed parking lot is going to be combined with the existing parking lot that is currently serving the PetSmart and Mattress Firm development. You'll also note that south of the proposed building itself, there's an area reserved for community use. That would be programmed at a later date. It is not part of a request at this time. Community use would be something that would be coordinated with the city, and indeed we do have a public art and sculpture committee that is currently meeting that would probably be interested in assisting with identifying what will be in the community use. But again, not part of this request at this time, just reserving that for down the road. On the screen right now are the proposed elevations for the building. They incorporate a variety of materials, some of which may require some additional consideration. We'll note that the build-to zone within Drexel Town Square requires 60 to 90% of the linear edge to be building facade. That would equate to about 128 feet based on the length of the parcel along Main Street. The entrance and the treatment of the west elevation would be considered for plan review at a later date. However, we would be working with the applicant to kind of address a couple of considerations for the build-to zone, particularly when it comes to presentation for the public, including a potential entrance off of the west elevation, which currently there is not programmed to be an entrance on that side. There are sidewalks, however, that provide access around the building from the north, from the south, from the east, from the west. On the screen right now are the proposed renderings showing the east and west sides. And you can get a little bit of what the ITM lanes look like as well. With that in mind, there is a suggested motion for approval on the screen for Plan Commission consideration. Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Carrie. Before we go to commission, would the applicant like to say anything, or you want to wait for questions?
David Ewanowski, 906 Hampshire Place in Madison, with Key Architecture on behalf of the credit union. I'm available to answer any questions. I think Carrie has summarized the proposal, but would be happy to answer any questions. So
great, thank you.
Yep.
This time we'll go to the commission. Christine, you want to start us off?
Yeah, I have no questions. I'm good, thanks.
Matt?
I have no questions at this time. Thank you.
Dawn?
I have only comments, not questions.
Oh, okay.
There was a reason why we didn't let Panera come through. Do we remember why? That was with a drive-through as well.
Yeah, but this is strictly drive-through where the tube's gonna go underground. We had pedestrian traffic crossing the drive-through. We had a very difficult time there taking that one down because
and I don't think you're on
right through the drive. Oh, you're not picking up?
I don't think so.
Sorry about that. So when we did that Panera, that drive-through was affected by a pedestrian sidewalk, whereas here you're not leaving your car. It's just traditional banking where the tubes are going to go underground.
The site plan for the proposed restaurant with drive-through facility gave concerns with regard to site circulation and pedestrian access, as the mayor was stating. This has fewer concerns because it is mostly vehicular access and the ITMs are separate. Where pedestrians would be walking, there's less concern for vehicular and pedestrian conflict than we had in the previous. And considering that this would be an area where we would have hours of operation that would be during the day rather than, kind of on the weekends and have a lot of conflict. At this point, this particular site plan gave us fewer concerns. There would be, opportunities that we could talk about improvements, but there's just fewer conflicts that we identified with this particular layout than we did with the Panera layout.
If I may, I think one of the differentiating factors was under the previous proposal, the queuing and the circulation were such that we could anticipate much greater conflicts than we would potentially see here under this kind of ITM. We can see that there's, and again, this is not a site plan review, but we have been working with UW Credit Union about siting the building and the facility and the traffic flow in a way that really addresses the goals that the city has for that corner and for Main Street and for that shared parking lot. And I think they actually have a concept here that allows, it really contains the stacking, the queuing to within that spot itself, and really doesn't really impact the greater parking lot or more importantly from our perspective, the private roadway network in that area to the extent that a more intensive use like a restaurant would have done.
But wasn't it our intent to have on Main Street a larger presence of, an apartment building with, retail below? I mean, that's what we have been saving those two lots for.
For the most part, Commissioner Crowley, you're correct. It wasn't an apartment building. That never was planned as a mixed-use building, but it was planned as retail.
Okay.
And from that perspective, we, the owners, have tried very vigorously to attract those types of tenants there. And it's been challenging. And one of the reasons why it's been challenging is, there's a few things without going into a whole lot of detail. Obviously, the climate for retail anywhere over the last year and a half has been dismal, and probably there was a sea change in that regard with respect to what we can expect as far as the level of retail in our communities moving forward. Second of all, you have to realize that this property is unique in such that it does carry some pretty significant deed restrictions from both Meyer and from Freighter, which don't allow, for instance, a lot of those medical or service uses that we could potentially see on Main Street. Doesn't allow for some of the specialty shop uses that we would love to see there, but are not allowed per the Meyer deed restriction. So I'm sure everyone feels a little bit handcuffed here, and we're looking for a use that still maintains the visual goals of DTS, which I think this can do, but it's a matter of, we want something to anchor the corner. And I know that you may disagree, but I think that's a valid concern that's going to be expressed by the property owners. And certainly, we don't enter into this without some reservations on our own. And as a staff, I think we've been really wrestling with that and trying to work with any potential user to make sure that whatever happens there is as consistent as possible with that first generation development plan.
Right, and I just don't see this at all. Sure. Having a big parking lot on Drexel that looks, like the mattress firm has a huge parking lot. So now we're going to contain those two parking lots kind of together, so it's going to look like a huge parking lot.
But that always was the plan.
Well, but still, this is the entrance to the Drexel Town Square that we've worked so hard on. And to put another bank on it, I just think we're going to get, the community is, talking about the bank that's, everybody's asking what's the new piece going next to, on Howell. Yeah. And when they hear it's a bank, they're like up in arms. All over social media. If we're going to put a bank on our Main Street next to our sign, we've waited so long. I just hate to give it up at this point. We're going to, we're developing across the, with IKEA and all those things are going to be developed. Something else should wait for this.
Yeah, I guess, I can't disagree with you, but I will say that I love banks. Banks are a sign of a healthy community. And, banks usually have beautiful architecture. And from the perspective of when people say we have too many banks, I just think that that's great because that means Oak Creek's healthy, Oak Creek's growing. People want to invest their money in Oak Creek. So from that perspective, I get it. It's not as, impactful or unique as many of us would like to see at that corner. But we have to look at the situation with respect to the likelihood of retail returning to that spot. Not even returning, it never was there.
Correct me if I'm wrong, I thought they were supposed to be mirrors of Forge and Flare going up there.
No, there would be single story retail. So multi-tenant, single story retail.
They're malls.
Well,
A little better,
I would hope so, yes.
but storefronts.
Yes.
Right. That building too, as Doug said, it always envisioned shared parking, and Commissioner Carrillo, I thought the same thing. And when I actually went and walked the site, it looks much larger on paper than it actually is when you actually get there.
And might I say, not in their defense, because UW Credit Union can certainly speak for themselves, but they don't need that much parking. That's a requirement of the property owner, and something that, as we do reopen and re-tenant the Pizza Man space and some of the other spaces on Main Street, we're all hopeful that we're going to need that parking. So I think that was one of the things that we had impressed upon them is, well, you may not need that. I think we do want to see that in some capacity so that we can preserve the ability to provide for the parking for a fully activated Drexel Town Square and Main Street.
And if we would have gotten that 10,000 square foot building, by our code, we would have needed more parking. So it's a little less impactful, which, allowed us on the southern end to retain some green space as well. But anyways, floor's still yours, Don.
Nope, I'm done.
Okay. Greg?
Excuse me. So this is in the second district. I do really like the look of the building. I know they recently built one in Franklin at the site of an old gas station, which to me is a great improvement over there. I do agree with Don on this one. I hear quite often complaints about more banks coming in. I did have, I guess, a different vision for this corner, being the entrance to Drexel. But I also agree with Doug. I know that it's currently a challenge, and this could sit vacant for a long time if things don't get back to normal soon. Even if it isn't retail, if it's a restaurant without a drive-through, even the restaurant industry is hurting, and I don't see them building new restaurants everywhere. So, not really questions, just an overall comment. Being that I hear from enough people in the second district over their concerns for banks continuing to come in. So this one's a kind of a tough one. But it is what it is. I think it's a great building. It looks really nice. And I do agree that parking is also a complaint around Drexel Town Square. I think this fits the plan that was intended, and I think it can help out a little bit with the parking needs around here. So.
Chris?
I think a couple comments for me is the bank, it's a good looking bank. My concern is the location. And I understand that, if banks or credit unions are coming to Oak Creek, it's a sign of a healthy community. I'm not sure that I think that this is the best place on Main Street. That's just my 2 cents. And that's about it.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. Don?
I agree with Don 100% on this. Not having a credit union there doesn't mean that we can't have many more in other places in the city, which we do, and we can certainly have more. The Panera thing was the drive-through layout was horrible. There's no question about that. But the comments were made many times that this is going to be a corner that is kind of the jewel, possibly, of Drexel Town Square. This is what you're going to see when you're coming in. And this will be the third credit union, a bank across the street. We got a couple banks. it's, you know, we're just gonna be Little Wall Street at some point, maybe, I don't know. But it's just, and nothing against, who we got here? I'm sorry. University of Wisconsin Credit Union. It's a nice looking building, and this is nothing personal whatsoever. It's just, I was, when I opened up my packet and I saw this, I was very disappointed. And, that's my 2 cents. Sorry. But Doug, I hear everything you're saying though. I mean, on the other hand, everything you're saying makes sense, but I'm willing to hold out on the long term. This pandemic will end at some point, and we don't want to look back and say, we should have waited. And that's kind of how I feel about it right now. I mean, everything you said has made 100% sense. I get it. But we only got one shot at this, you know, or at least, you know, one shot now, and then who knows when you have to redo it. So that's it.
Man, Fred. I go along with the comments that have been made by our other commissioners. I just have a quick question too, though. Is what is that little green square that says community use that's south of the bank?
It's a reservation. It's intended to be programmed by the city. It was reserved in the conversations that were with the applicant and the developer to provide an area that would allow us to kind of extend the public realm there and not necessarily have it all be private. What that would be, we're not sure yet, but it is a rather large space that we have, you know, a lot of potential for. The entire site is not something, I mean, they wanted the site, but it's a little bit big, which is why the initial request was for less parking rather than the parking that we are asking them to show here. It extends the public realm so that while the building may not take up the entirety of the main street, it's supposed to activate the space. So we have an opportunity here to actually provide that, the beginnings of what we hope to be a very robust public art and public art and sculpture program. So this is something that we're actually very happy to see. If it weren't going to be all building, it allows us to do our own activation.
So I think from the extent that, I mean, the group at UW Credit Union has from day one been very sensitive to what the needs of the city and the vision of the city is for this property. And such that, I mean, they've looked at various iterations about how they can accomplish, obviously, what they need to do as a financial institution. At the same time, provide that unique community-oriented aspect of their location at Drexel Town Square, which by their own admission is a very unique spot. Right? You know, obviously everyone here agrees with that. What you're right. I can't disagree with any of the comments made by the commission this evening, but I think it's important to note that the original first generation development plan for Drexel Town Square again called for single-story, I think 2 smaller buildings of single-story multi-tenant retail there. And I think probably the best metric, without saying that it would be a clone of that, would be akin to what you're seeing right on the corner of 6th and 6th and Drexel, with the Associated Bank and the various tenancies there. So, I mean, from the perspective of the expectation that there be this iconic architecture for essentially what is a multi-tenant building, you know, I'm not sure that we can rely on that. Obviously, we'd love to land that one user who can put up this very prominent building that, you know, we could all look to and say, yeah, that's it. That hasn't happened yet. Not to say that it won't, not to say that we can't be patient about that. But I think when you compare the two, compare what the first generation development proposal was for 11,000 square foot of multi-tenant retail versus what we show here is about 6,000, between 6,000 and 7,000 square feet of a financial institution with, again, those kind of open for discussion community areas, preservation of areas for landscaping, and preservation of those areas for common parking. That's not easy. And, you know, I think there's no right answer here, there's no wrong answer here. But I think when you make your decision, I think you need to evaluate it versus what the reality is and what was initially proposed for that, not what, I mean, our collective hope is for that corner, because obviously whatever goes here, whether we work with UW or we work with the next person, we're going to go for the best possible development at that corner. And I would expect nothing less from this commission, and I hope the commission would expect nothing less from staff.
Thank you.
Is that it, Fred?
Yep.
Chauncey?
I do have a couple questions for the applicant.
Again, David Iwanowski, 906 Hampshire Place in Madison.
Can you share details on how the bank will function? Meaning, is the bank, the building itself, only for employees? Can customers come into the bank, or is it just a drive-through for the ITMs for customers?
Sure. The credit union is a member organization, cooperative basically, to serve members in the community. And this would serve as, call it a retail branch operation. In other words, it would have member services in there that would include traditional teller services as well as counseling, loans, those types of things. So it includes the kind of one-on-one teller services, but then also closing rooms for consultation and other transactions as well. And then there are also some technology aspects to it. We're proposing a walk-up ITM or ATM there, as well as some of the technology support functions that they have. So if you have financial transactions on your phone, et cetera. And then the drive-up facility, which is ITMs, there are no tellers inside directly connected to those like a traditional drive-up facility. That's why they can be remote. So you would be doing traditional ATM transactions or eventually interactive transactions via video. So yes, it's all for member services within the facility.
So I know it came up earlier about the little tubing station.
Right. No tubing.
Oh, okay.
It's all done digitally now.
Okay.
So the current technology is developing, and the credit union is rolling this out as for what's called interactive teller machines. So you can converse with somebody via video. They may be in the building right there, or they may be somewhere else. And this is really where the technology is going. So you're not hamstrung by physically having somebody connected by a pneumatic tube.
And what are the intended times for the bank to be open?
I think Carrie pointed those out. Generally speaking, they're open from, the lobby at least is open from 9 to 5:30 during the week, and I think 9 to 1 on Saturdays. That's the lobby. Mm-hmm. Closed on Sundays. And then the ITMs traditionally are open 24/7. I mean, they're available as drive-up.
So someone would be available 24/7 if they want to speak with someone?
When the technology is fully implemented, that would be possible. Right now, as they're rolling it out, they may or may not have somebody there full-time, but that technology is feasible, yes.
And for the majority of the customers, do you think the majority would use the ITMs or would use the building for member services?
It's interesting. I think there's been a lot of predictions that brick and mortar financial or banking is going away, but it's not, and it's both for walk-up traffic as well as for ITM or ATM transactions. And I think if you think about how we all do those kind of things, if you need cash or need to do something quickly or even make a deposit, drive up is okay. But if you're procuring a loan or you need to do something that involves face-to-face transactions, that's where a retail or physical branch is still very valuable to the members. So both. In terms of numbers, I don't have that. The credit union has done analysis. Obviously, the last year and a half or so with COVID, it's kind of changed the whole numbers in terms of, in fact, the lobby at most financial institutions were closed during much of COVID. So.
Thank you.
Okay. Boy, everybody had very valid points here, and Doug, you did as well. What you're seeing here is actually about maybe the third rendering of when they came forward with the building and the positioning of it. Because at first staff really wasn't too hip on not the banking so much, but the building itself. So the building itself had to stand out. It had to be more of a landmark just based on where it sat. And as you all stated, that's a very prominent corner, no matter what you put there. Pre-pandemic, they went out to market this land, and they had a couple of things come through, and Doug mentioned this, and I don't know if anybody really picked up on it, but we do have some covenants within Drexel Town Square, which puts huge restrictions on what we can and cannot put in there. And it's maddening at times because we've had some very good prospects and we just can't get any bend from these pre-existing agreements we did. So that very much limits the marketing of what can go there. As Doug stated, I hear it a lot too about financial institutions coming here. It says a lot about the value of Oak Creek, and banks come where it's healthy. So from that perspective, it's a good thing. We repositioned the building. We upscaled it some. We'd love to see something like Forge and Flare, and that's been brought up as well. But the retail spots at Forge and Flare currently have some vacancies. So the appetite ain't quite there for that. We still have the opposite side lots. I believe that's B1 building and B2 going on. So this was kind of the least impactful going forward. Plus the community space, which kept Drexel Town Square a little bit green. So it may not be what we all wish for, but again, it's kind of what market's dictating. And very few banks ever go out of business. If anything, they improve themselves. Educators is coming in there over in Drexel Town Square. They're moving. They'll repurpose that building. So again, I do think it's a very nice looking building for that particular corner. It'd be great if we could have some other things, but unfortunately, the opportunity we have here is what we're faced with. So that's what we will be voting on today, is the conditional use. So keep in mind, even if we did get that C1 building with multiple tenants, and a financial institution came in, you would still be voting on conditional use for the exact same purpose. So keep that in mind as well. So,
and
yeah.
Just real quick, thanks for pointing out about or reminding us about the covenants, because with what you can and can't do there, we're kind of tied in or locked in between what Freighter's dictating and what Myers is dictating. So that's kind of been hurting, right? Driving.
It makes things difficult. I don't always throw out the names of where the covenants come from, but yes, there's medical restrictions that go in. There's competition. At one point in time, we had a custom meat processor butcher that was very interested in coming in, and it was dead on arrival due to the covenants. So believe it or not, even things such as a florist would have a difficult time at times, which is, kind of odd. And believe it or not, certain restaurants would struggle coming in too, depending on the percentage of product they have of a certain type. So we got some rocks to maneuver around there. So again, this has been presented to us, and again, it's we'll see where the vote goes on the conditional use. So if there's any other questions or discussions, we'll speak now or we'll ask for a motion.
Mayor?
Yes.
I'd just like to make a comment, I guess. We speak of these covenants, but I'm going to guess that the majority of the commissioners up here do not know what those covenants are.
No, and
I mean, a summarization of them, I'm not saying pointing out who they are or who holds them, but having an idea of what they are might lend some help and understanding for most of the commissioners on understanding why certain businesses or other things can't come in. And, you know, I don't know if that's allowed or not, but it could potentially help.
I think that's a great point.
I'm not saying now.
Yeah, Commissioner Sullivan, I mean, maybe what I can offer is certainly, I mean, based on the discussion that we have tonight, I think it's important that the commission have all of that information available to them. And obviously to make the decision as you will, but I'd be happy to hold this over until next time, and then we can provide you with a full list of those covenants.
Yeah, I don't feel comfortable myself speaking on it. I would probably defer to staff, whether Doug or Melissa or someone like that. So maybe that's a good idea to hold.
We'll put them out there in black and white for you.
Yeah. So, if that's flavor and we'd feel more comfortable knowing those covenants.
Is it gonna change?
We'll do a motion to hold.
Well, let's just ask the question. Are there commissioner, I've had that conversation a couple times, so I got a pretty good idea. And I know Myers, because they do so many things, probably a lot of restrictions there just with them alone. But the question is, do the rest of the commissioners understand them? I think I have a good understanding. If you want to have a little tutor session, that's fine.
Yes, I do have a comment here. So, like you just mentioned, Mr. Mayor, that having a bank there, it has a very long time for it before it get impacted, or there is a turnaround of tenant versus a fast food restaurant or a florist or something from that nature. And especially this is the entrance of Drexel Town Square, so this is something that's going to be there for a very long time, especially with the technology that was shared with us. So you have something even more advanced to match Drexel Town Square, new theme of how modern it is. Pretty much, I was just going to say, regardless of who are the other tenants who are just having those agreement with, nobody wants a competition. So we're going to have a very hard time finding some tenant that are willing to come in and meet those restrictions by others. Also, leaving it vacant, in my opinion, this is a loss of funds. This is a loss of taxes that can be used to serve the community here. So I would suggest that we just have to be careful how we make that decision.
Well said. So, it was brought up, we could do a little session. We could hold it over for 2 weeks, and you could learn more about what the restriction covenants are, or you could move to make the motion tonight.
I guess I would also offer that we could provide you with what the renderings were for the first generation buildings at that location.
Make a motion with a motion.
I think we're all okay with.
Okay.
I want to make sure everyone's on the same.
Well, make the motion, we will find out.
Well, Donnie moves that the Plan Commission recommends that the Common Council approves a conditional use permit for a financial institution with drive-through facility on the property of 7902 South Main Street after a public hearing and subject to conditions and restrictions that will be prepared for the Plan Commission's review at the next meeting, October 12th, 2021.
Seifert seconds.
Roll call, beginning with myself. Aye.
Guzekowski, aye. Donnie, no.
Seifert, aye.
Chandler, no. Anna, aye.
Sullivan, aye.
Rilla, no.
Clark, aye. Okay. So conditional use is done again. This will float by us again for the building and the whole thing. What, 2 more times, Doug?
Come back with conditions and restrictions.
Conditions and restrictions.
I will bring back, if not as part of the meeting, I will provide that information to you.
Yeah, but again, Commissioner Sullivan, I think that was a great suggestion on the covenants, and we just got to make sure, we do it properly. So, okay, moving right along, we're getting kind of long here. We have a Plan Commission presentation. We'll hear a presentation on the Drexel Avenue Streetscape Plan.
Yes, Mr. Mayor, we have invited members of our design team, So we have representatives from Grafe with us tonight that will give us a presentation on where we are with the Drexel Streetscape project as soon as I can get my computer to play along with me.
All right.
Technology has
Thank you
been
for your
an issue
patience,
today.
guys. Appreciate it.
Not a problem.
Not paying you by the hour, are we?
No, lump sum, so you made a
that's
good
the case,
decision
put them
there, yeah,
on
the agenda next time.
Are you able to advance?
It's just that we.
While we're pulling it up, my name is Craig Hebner with Grafe, 275 West Wisconsin Avenue, Suite 300. Grafe, for those who aren't aware, is a design, engineering, multidisciplinary firm. We're located right in downtown Milwaukee. Tonight, we're going to be talking about Drexel Avenue and a streetscape conceptual plan for that. Tonight with me, I have Joe Pepitone, who is a landscape architect and leads our landscape architecture group at Grafe. And then also as part of our project team, we brought on Marty Peck, who is with Creative Lighting Design and Engineering. You maybe recognize some of Marty's work throughout Wisconsin and Milwaukee area, from the Potawatomi Casino, Milwaukee County Domes, Shorewoods, Ghost Train, former railroad bridge. So lots of famous lighting design work throughout the metro area. So Carrie, I think I'm going to rely on you if you can hit the next slide. There we go. Perfect. So in May, Grafe was contracted by the city to produce a conceptual streetscape design. It's not final designs at all. This is kind of the vision to give you as a city the opportunity to re-envision the current existing condition of Drexel Avenue. So we're looking at all the way from IKEA Way on the west and then all the way to Howell on the east side. Next slide. As far as the design approach, Oak Creek, obviously, city is a city on the lake. And with our idea is, you know, how do people really identify this or know that when they're driving through Oak Creek, primarily from the freeway itself? And when you look at the lake, one of the key new projects, obviously, is your Lake Vista Park. So the design approach is how could Drexel Avenue encapsulate some of the design materiality palette that's used on that very attractive new park and pull that into the Drexel Avenue corridor. From a high level, there's really three areas of Drexel Avenue. On the west end, you have the freeway. This is really your first opportunity for what you could see from a design standpoint. So we want to introduce different elements that'll draw you in, bring you off of the freeway and into Oak Creek. And the center is really landscaping to slow you down. Drexel Avenue is very fast moving, obviously, with traffic. So how can our streetscape design really serve as traffic calming elements and also create a sense of place? And then on the east, it's really already a great destination with Drexel Town Square. So how does the streetscape really more complement existing uses that are happening in this area? A lot of site opportunities when you look at this corridor. Obviously, not much happening from a landscape standpoint, so the palette is prime for opportunity, but really we've highlighted almost everything. You look at the medians, you look at the terrace spaces as opportunities for streetscape, but really intersections are also one opportunity area, as well as off-site. So we're primarily looking at the right-of-way, but there's also private sector properties that could be part of the streetscape vision. So the concept, the next couple slides will kind of give some conceptual treatments. So on the left side, what we have as an idea is looking at different movement in the landscape. Drexel Avenue is all about movement, so how can the landscape support that? We have lots of introduction of bold plantings, the idea of landscape manipulation and integration with wall design. I don't know if it's blocked on your screen or not. I apologize if it is. But several of these elements then really are meant to emphasize movement in the landscape design. And this is accomplished through your typical streetscape elements that you see on the right. Next slide. The corridor itself is primarily visible. You see the large, wider medians and then narrow medians. So that's really the biggest opportunity for impact. Intersections are typically another way with streetscape that we would see. There's currently a roadway construction project that's underway, but that is a little bit limiting from the streetscape design. So we'll show some other ideas still for those intersections that we can look at. The next couple of slides are just some precedent imagery that our team looked at to pull in. So from the median treatment, looking at definitely introducing canopy trees, ornamental trees, low-level planting, but also this idea of meandering serpentine wall that would be a common element along the entire corridor that we'll show some imagery of. Lighting obviously is one idea that would be a big wow factor. These are just some very high-level ideas, but obviously the railroad bridge is one thing that you really see right now in Drexel, but what our team wants to introduce is also, if we produce a really substantial streetscape design and landscape, that bridge is almost going to become more of an afterthought. So yes, you can put a lot of money into a potential idea for that bridge, but also it may be more bang for the buck if you really embrace the entire corridor and landscape. And you can still do things with the railroad bridge, such as lighting or different murals that you see examples of here. And we'll show some other examples with the presentation. At the intersections, again, since we can't do much with the actual pavement itself, signage is one opportunity that we'll show some ideas for. And then I think the last precedent imagery here is the idea for artistic expression throughout the corridor. We want to embrace Oak Creek's art community, and this could be through a series of different art sculptures that you see precedent imagery in front of you. So moving on to the design, if you look at a typical section of the corridor, what you see here in plan view is one common thing that doesn't exist right now is there'll be sidewalk on both sides of the street. Oak Leaf Trail is currently primarily on the south from the majority of the corridor, but the roadway plan includes a sidewalk. But then from a landscape side, within the medians, you see a substantial increase in groupings of trees. Quaking aspen is a species that we're introducing. It's a very vivid, attractive tree that is clustered in its design and really makes a big impact. We're proposing, again, some landscape manipulation where it would rise up within the medians and provide wall opportunities for signage, lighting, and so forth. Next slide. When you look at a cross section here, this is one of the narrow medians. You can see different quaking aspen, again, trees and some ornamental trees and low-level plantings. The bottom there is just an elevation view of that median. And on the next slide is a typical application for our large medians. So here you see the introduction, again, of small berm, 3 foot high with wall on one side that, again, would provide opportunity for branding for Oak Creek, Drexel Avenue, and other elements. Next slide. Another example as far as materiality for these large medians on this wall with a raised planter, not only potentially the palette that you see at Lake Vista Park with the field stone, but introducing Core 10 as a potential another very attractive material that works well with lighting, etched in designs and so forth. Next slide shows a perspective image, so what this could start to look like from more of a 3D view. You see low-level, low-maintenance grass on really the end caps of the medians, and then as you go into the medians themselves, you see different perennial ornamental grasses and the trees in the distance. The next slide shows a narrow median, and still that you could put in those quaking aspens that really embrace that movement theme. When wind blows through these, that's where the name quaking comes from. It really is meant to kind of embrace that sound and movement. The next slide, if you zoom a little in to one of these ideas, in the large medians, you can see different materials working together and also branding potential for signage. Another zoom in potential materiality difference where you can see the Core 10 material introduced. And just an opposite view that you can see again with the combination of trees and wall signage. Now, lighting is a big thing, and after I'm done speaking, I have maybe like 10 more slides, so I'm trying to go as quick as possible for questions, but we really think lighting is a great opportunity, and Marty can speak to that. But what you see on the screen is the idea of illuminating several different things along the corridor, whether that's just those wall elements or uplighting trees, but What our team is thinking of is really how can these lighting elements speak to each other, and they could be consistent throughout the corridor and have different movement of color and glowing. You also could introduce different ways for pedestrians to interact with these different lighting elements, with at restaurants, private sector development, where people could interact with these different elements as well. So there's no shortage of opportunities from an interactive lighting display option that we can go into. The next slide just shows some precedent imagery that Marty pulled together. Again, night would really be when these come to life, but during the day there's also opportunity to still be visible and make these artistic sculptures still beautiful and attractive. The final couple of slides talk about branding, monuments, and sculptures. We have introduced kind of 4 categories: your primary, secondary, tertiary, but then also really artistic sculptures throughout the corridor and where they could be located. This slide starts first with the artistic sculptures. So just as ideas to get out there, we've included some wind turbines, which could be a potential playful activity that embraces movement again, but also could provide some energy for the actual electricity for the actual lighting. On the bottom right and on the right side, you see the idea of an actual fabricated steel tree sculpture. So it would not be an actual live tree, but more of that artistic expression of a tree that could be illuminated in different ways as well. With these artistic sculptures, they really could be a way to also screen different things. So if the railroad bridge is really something that is an eyesore and we want to block that, these sculptural elements such as a fabricated tree instead of landscape could be one way to block that view. Moving back to monument or primary monument elements. So on the top, you see a little key, and all the red dots are where we're introducing these primary monument elements. And when I say primary, these are really your gateway elements that are visible from the freeway, and really elements as well located throughout the corridor that would draw your eye through the corridor. So they're not just at one spot, but you actually would see these throughout the corridor. And the image examples really embrace lighting. We would want to see these illuminated pillars. On the left side are precedent imagery, and on the right are some sketches that our team have started to assemble, where the base would be a masonry component and the top is more of this illuminated pylon that's visible throughout the corridor. Looking specifically at how this would look as you go down the corridor, just to get a concept of scale, these would be, 30-foot high monuments potentially, whereas you're approaching one segment of the corridor, you see another one in the distance. The next slide shows just a variation of what that could look like with 3 different monument signs, and then the next one shows kind of how it could be flanking the road, so it doesn't always have to be in the median itself. But again, these are meant to draw pedestrians and cars through the corridor as, oh, what's next? I want to keep going through this corridor. Secondary elements are located at kind of your secondary major intersections. This can be different branding for Drexel Avenue or other businesses. You can see some conceptual sketches. Again, lighting would be an element that we would love to introduce with these signage elements. And then the last one, as part of our scope, it was asked kind of how could signage and wayfinding be implemented citywide. So we started to just put some ideas on paper for caps of some of these signage elements that could play off of your either existing logo or just colors, abstractions. Not going into far detail here, but just that this could be a citywide implementation. Final slides are just plan views, so Carrie, you can kind of flip through these, but it just shows that similar application of both median terrace treatment and how these different groupings of trees would really be a drastic and kind of welcoming change to the current lack of landscape that's currently in the corridor. So I talked a lot. Our team is here to answer questions. That's all I have for our presentation tonight. Thank you.
All right. Commissioners, questions, comments? Christine, start us off.
I have a couple of questions.
Hang on, Fred. Christine's out there first. How can beat you to it?
Sorry about that. So it's just one comment, and it's just for everyone here. I really like all of those luminaire and the sculpture. My only concern, because I've seen it before happened, that we have to make sure we have budget for the landscaping and for the lighting and for all of this. And this is had to be done with the city to make sure the consultant will provide the estimated maintenance cost for all those elements so the city can look into it and make sure they have budgeted for. Otherwise, it's just gonna be performing the opposite of what the intent would be. So, that's it.
Yeah, I guess just to comment on that, and you're absolutely right. I mean, the last thing we want to do is to invest in the corridor only to have it kind of just go on its own over the course of years. I mean, we're making the investment not only to fund the initial outlay and the capital expense, but this is a long-term investment in the corridor and maintaining the corridor. And the charge, you're absolutely right, to the consultant was, show us some options that are maintainable and that will stand the test of time.
Ben?
Yeah, I was a little concerned about the lighting and what it looked like. I'm concerned that it could be somewhat distraction to the driver at night if you've got all these bright lights and flashing and colors and so forth. Somebody's driving and he's looking at the lights rather than paying attention to his driving down that boulevard. And that's a little concern of what type of lighting. Is it bright? Is it kind of sedate? It just doesn't seem to be fitting in too much to the driving aspect of the boulevard.
And I'd like to respond, of course, to that. That's a good question and one of our primary concerns. Light came on. I thought it was on. Okay. I'll have to talk louder.
Hello.
There we go. And we've done this a few areas before, and the strategy here is that, first of all, to energize the street to a certain level, but not overwhelm. And in placemaking, we want to create an attraction, but not overdo it. And that's all a matter of programming and intensity. It's not going to be strobing lights. It's not going to be flashing lights. They're not going to be bright lights in anyone's eyes. Currently, and it's all programmable, so there's a complete control over the intensity and the movement and the animation of anything. Our initial thoughts are to have colors slowly flow down the street. So there might be a background color in these monuments and maybe some of the artistic sculptures at night especially, of, say, for example, a golden amber. And then you might see a soft blue that would fade up and fade down, and you get almost this wave motion, this gentle undulation of color moving down through this variety of different elements on the street. So it would be intriguing. It would suggest that there's some progressiveness to it, some artisticness to it. And certainly a little bit of technology and a lot of visual interest. But we'd have to be careful not to distract from the drivers, and really the idea is to slow things down and bring people into the space and not encourage them to get through the space as quickly as possible. We want to make it interesting.
Also concerned about the lighting for the bridge or the railroad trestle that we have of going through that area, of what type of lighting that you'd have.
Well, at this juncture, there's a lot of options. But for example, what we did in Shorewood at the Oak Leaf Trail Bridge, which used to carry a train but no longer does, is we have a series of pixels across the top part of the bridge and a series of floodlighting segments across the surface, the vertical surface of the bridge. And there's 32 different sequences of animations that slowly move and create gentle movement to that bridge, so that if you look at it at any particular moment, it's not flashing, it's not jumping, it's not doing anything that would startle you or would pull you suddenly, but it's all very slow, methodical, almost hypnotic movements that create that visual interest. And it's something that people can watch, and they do. The ghost train itself is actually a 30, 40 second feature that happens twice a night, and that is much more active. That's actually a suggestion of the train moving across the bridge. And when that happens, there's the train horns, the whole bit and caboodle that makes that happen. And in that case, we do actually trigger the stoplights to stop traffic for that. But we don't anticipate anything that animated to that high level of animation here. Now, the other thing I'm sorry.
I want to make sure we can get to everyone. And you saw images, obviously, that maybe were concerning. We purposely kind of included several different options. So I think we wanted to hear feedback from too much intensity versus more of, different applications that Marty's speaking of. So I appreciate that comment that you had.
Can I add something real quick to echo that? The Horn Bridge has exactly the lighting that they were referring to, and it's on the bridge, so on a freeway. So it's a good example that it's not distraction from drivers or speeding or any from that sort. Actually, it's used on the opposite. It's meant to slow down traffic. So, but not distraction wise, it's that slow. So there's like a limit between those type of usage of lighting. So, an example.
And if I may, I think we're talking about 3 different types of bridges and scales of bridges here as well. So it may be quite appropriate not to do any lighting on this bridge, as kind of Craig alluded to. We may want to try to make it recede, within the lands, what other treatments we do. So lighting may not be the right option for this bridge. Just so we're looking at all.
My objection was just that I didn't want people to come into that and all of a sudden slow up because their kids want to look and say, hey, and I've got a flow of traffic and all of a sudden I hit a slow portion of it and people slow down. I want to keep the traffic moving. I don't want to interrupt the flow.
Understood. And there's a balance to this because there's also your street functional lighting that's going to still be there. You have to light the streets for safety and for visibility. This is kind of an adjunct to that, which isn't intended to overtake or overpower that.
Thank you.
Greg?
So just a couple comments. I would echo, obviously, the budget concern. All the renderings are amazing, and it's very exciting to see that type of stuff. And while there's concern for budget for all this, I do want to note that if it's going to be done, that we want to get it done right as a city. No offense to anybody, if anybody in the room was associated with the 27th Street streetscape, but it's not exciting to me. I drive down it all the time. It's not welcoming to me. All these pictures and renderings are definitely something that the city could be proud of and are exciting for people that are coming through town here. I love the lighting. I know it's not designed this way, but the lights that are going out around Milwaukee that are now purple, I love driving through. The kids love when I drive through the neighborhoods because they think it's changing for Halloween, which I don't think it is. A couple things I did note. The south side of Drexel is the 2nd district. I'm the 2nd district alderman. Concerns I hear very often, there's a stretch of residential that abuts the street. A lot of complaint about noise. I know a lot of it could be related to the bumpiness of the road and trucks bouncing up and down. Currently, they do have fencing up. It's obviously they're all private homes, so a lot of the fencing is kind of mismatch. I don't know if there's any type of element that could be put up that makes that uniform, any type of sound barrier wall, anything for those residents, that would be appreciated if it could be designed in. Also, there's portions, my family and I ride bikes a lot. We ride down the sidewalk quite often. There's a lot of portions where the sidewalk is directly against the road. With small kids, while I do trust them for the most part, it is kind of treacherous at times just because of the speed of the traffic. So any type of separation, I did notice there were some tree lines and things like that. And I know that you're probably stuck to the width of the road there, but any separation from the trail or the sidewalk from the road is also appreciated and needed. So it's my initial comments of things I saw.
Okay. Any input? They're right. Anything, Don? Chauncey?
I do have a question. I don't know if it's for Director Seymour or to the mayor. So if I'm understanding this correctly, this is for Drexel, correct?
Yep.
Drexel Avenue?
We got a grant
Okay.
specifically on Drexel.
So are the other areas where it connects included? Because it'll just be one street that looks really nice and then it stops.
Well, you know, at the intersections, they had larger monuments at 13th, 6th Street, 10th were secondaries, and probably Howell, and then, of course, at the expressway, they were probably
And I think that you're right. I mean, obviously, we'd love to have every street in the city look, you know, great and top notch. But I think this offers you the opportunity to take your main street, for lack of a better term, and, you know, dress it up and really kind of portray the vision of the community that you want to portray. And to that extent, I think there's some hints in here that offer suggestions as how do you do wayfinding. I mean, you know, you're right, we're a community in the lake, but you know, everyone who gets off the freeway doesn't know that. You know, we've got our Abendschein Park, which is a half-mile east of there. You know, and you start to introduce these wayfinding elements that kind of reinforce that brand or image throughout the community. So, while I don't think we could, you know, and maybe I'm wrong, make the investment of capital necessary to improve all of our corridors in the same fashion. I think that there are some ways you can introduce that conversation cost effectively on streets that we can control or work with the state on.
Thank you.
I love the idea of the tree lines, especially to the outside, because we have some very unattractive buildings on that road. So drawing attention, either hiding them or, you know, drawing attention to something else. They've been there forever. And as well as all the fences that don't match each other, and that just never looks good on that edge. All the weeds coming up and all that kind of stuff. But also looking at the plantings, just, you know, maybe I'm so tied in with Drexel Town Square, but we have I mean, there are huge areas with no live plants. They're all died, you know, I mean, so if there's a lot of upkeep to this, we can't keep them alive in Drexel Town Square if this is adding a ton more plantings. I don't know if any of you guys ever take a look, but walk through the beds, you know, I mean, and so that's what would be my concern, is that would we be able to continue to?
And I think that's a great comment, and that's not a reason not to do this.
Right.
I mean, it's just the opposite. It's really, you know, can you imagine the investment that this community made in Drexel Town Square? And I don't want to, you know, certainly cast shadows on our staff or anything like that. But I mean, we are not necessarily designed to maintain it to the level that it needs to be maintained. And I think that those are ongoing conversations and how you do that. But again, it's not a reason to dumb it down so that we can maintain it.
But just to draw attention to that.
Right.
Chris, Matt, well, also I haven't heard from nothing.
Great.
So just very quickly, everybody pretty much hit on some of the things I was going to say. Maintenance, number one. Dawn kind of hit it. You know, we have a hard time maintaining some of the stuff we do, and as Doug said, we don't want to dumb it down. By the same token, you know, if you have stretches of steel sculpt trees, whatever they are, either way, you know, I'm a big fan of the brick, the steel. If you design them things so we can get through in one cutting pass on grass, or if it's going to be prairie grass, or whatever the heck it's going to be, we really got to put some thought in. And when we can correct things that are wrong, and Greg and Dawn brought this up, that stretch between 13th and 10th on the south side, those are private homes built probably in the 70s. That subdivision went in, and I think they used big junipers or aspens. Some are still there. Some people put in fences. We got a sinking transformer there. It's a mess, and the city owns some of it. We'd have to find something with the property owners. But if we have an opportunity to make that look better, for sure. I wouldn't go so far as to say we have very unattractive buildings on Drexel Town Square. Dawn. But I would say, you know, we do have an industrial corridor there where maybe something a little taller and a little more attention grabbing would go there for sure. As Greg said, lights changing for the season, the red to green, things like that. And, we're kind of looking for a thing, and we've talked about a lot of art, and, maybe giving local artists some kind of chances at things or whatever it is. I'm probably not the guy to ask about art, but, I'm a particular fan of things that we can keep up with. The city of Greenfield did some stuff. Some of their islands are complete pavers, and they got the winding metal fence through there, and, wherever they got their park with the band shell, they got music, similar to what they did on the expressways. So I think we're off to a really good start. And Greg made another great point. That sidewalk on the south side there from 10th to 6th, well, the train tracks, it abuts the roadway. A separation there would probably be really appreciated. So, railroad, real quickly, anything to spruce up that concrete would be great. Actually doing anything on the railroad bridge, holy cow, that's a tough deal with the railroad, but we could aspire to clean that up. I think it would be excellent, without a doubt. I'm really looking forward to it. I do think Doug brought up wayfinding. Nobody knows the middle school is just to the south there, the intersection, or the theater is the other way. And there's quite a bit to look forward to on this. It's a big project, without a doubt.
And just one comment on the railroad. I don't know if they are Canadian Pacific or Union Pacific. If this is going to be shared with the public, we have to be very careful until we coordinate with the railroad, and they are extremely hard to accept any of this. Most likely they will say no. So I coordinate with them a lot. But anyway, I would not share this unless it's confirmed.
Again, big fan of trees and everything like that, but it's a matter of cleaning up after them and the whole thing. So and as Doug said, we don't want to dumb it down, live vegetation, but we want to be smart about what we do going forward. We're 6-7 years into this, and we had to put a sizable investment just around this building in the plantings. So Dawn's right. I want to be very conscious of what we do going forward.
If I may, our team can just respond to a couple comments. Joe, maybe on maintenance. And as far as a couple things I'll just note first, part of our scope is looking at conceptual budget for all these things. So that'll definitely be a deliverable that your staff made sure was part of this project. So that'll be addressed. Definitely appreciate the specific comments about residents and users and how the streetscape can mitigate current concerns. I would say as one approach, just adding landscape in that median is going to start to buffer, one side of that roadway already for movement of traffic, but just vegetation in general is one way. You don't necessarily have to do a wall to block that. Landscape goes a long way in doing that as one potential approach to that. Maybe Joe, from a maintenance standpoint, if you want to give any 2 cents kind of on our approach.
Yeah, and I think, just so for your edification, we did have some stakeholder meetings, and we included the maintenance staff, so we understand where they're coming from. We also understand they're understaffed. So as we look at this, if we move forward with this nice design, to all of your points, we want to make sure that it can be maintained well enough so that you can still be proud of it after 5 years it's installed. So that has to be part of the plan. We can do a beautiful design, but if it's not maintained and there isn't money or budget to do it, then why do it, right? So, but if you plan for it, then yeah, it makes it much more successful.
And just one more thing, Drexel is very well traveled, very well traveled by car, but this can also be, as Greg said, a pedestrian friendly walkway that people want to go on and use the sidewalks and bicycle, and it is part of Oakleaf. I'm sure you're aware of that.
Yep.
But that should probably play a prominent role in it too.
Yep.
So.
And if I could add too, I think that was one of the key things that we were thinking about with the lighting, is to bring that more pedestrian scale into it.
Yeah.
Because there's intricacies that when you're driving past, you won't necessarily capture, but with the lighting, it'll bring a little more interest into it, and it'll make it a pedestrian friendly space. And I wanted to comment too, regarding the railway right-of-way and the issue with that. One of the thoughts that we shared early on was the idea of creating sort of a sculptural element that would appear to be part of the viaduct, but would actually be off of it and maybe attached to the city right-of-way, but not necessarily attached to the viaduct itself. But as you're approaching it or going under it, maybe the lighting underneath and the lighting on the sculpture would feel like it's bigger, more interesting, and not necessarily attached to the railway's property.
It's exciting. All the plans are very exciting. I do agree. We're going to get a lot of pushback on, what about my road? What's going on my road? So, but again, in time, as we move through, different parts of the city develop differently. Never know what's going to happen on Fifth Avenue, give 20 years. So. Any other questions? I appreciate you guys sticking around this late.
Thank you guys for sticking around late.
Sure feels late.
Great, thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, that will get us to item 8F, and this is really a discussion of cancellation of either the November 23rd meeting, which must be right at Thanksgiving, or the 28th, which is probably between Christmas and New Year's. Carrie?
Every year we cancel one meeting, and I'm giving you all the opportunity to pick which meeting we cancel.
In a leap year, do you get two?
No. It's such a rare opportunity that we cancel a meeting, and it usually happens around the holidays. And, sometimes we have one or two items on the agenda that we might be able to push to another meeting and then cancel that one. But with all the projects that we have, it's just not an option. So we're at the holidays at this point. Can you believe it?
Yeah.
So we have either, the Tuesday before Thanksgiving or the Tuesday after Christmas as being your options.
Cancel December.
December
for me.
Have a preference?
I don't have a preference.
I'm working all the time, but if I did, I'd probably take the December one too.
Right.
If you like December, raise your hand.
Matt?
Who doesn't care?
Yeah, Carol, Greg?
I'm fine with December.
Chris?
December.
Don?
I'm indifferent.
Brad?
December 28th.
Looks like we're going with the 28th.
All right, if we could have a motion for December 28th, please.
Seifert moves to cancel the meeting for December 28th, 2021.
Guzekowski will second.
Roll call, starting with Chris.
Guzekowski, aye.
Goldani, aye.
Seifert, aye.
Chandler, aye.
Anna, aye.
Sullivan, aye.
Grillo, aye.
Clark, aye.
David, aye.
Thank you very much, everyone.
And that gets us to 8F, which is announcements and adjournments. So a couple announcements this weekend at you know what, Dawn? I'll let you do it. Farmers Market and Cafe.
Yes, this weekend I want to see everyone there. From 9 to 1 o'clock, we have cafe in the Drexel Square associated with the farmers market. And we have a dozen cultures being represented with entertainment. So there'll be dancing, mariachi band, all the, I think 12 different cultures represented. And then each will have a tent and it'll have food samples that are free. So come out to the market this Saturday. And then we have 4 more markets after that.
So for those of you that don't know, CAFE stands for Culture, Art, Food, and Entertainment. And we really want to bring out the diversity in Oak Creek. We have quite a few different heritages and cultures within the city. And this is one way of getting people aware that everything is out there. So, come meet people that live within Oak Creek. And we're hoping to grow it and add more groups. And
yeah, in 2019 we did it. And it was very organic, and we just did it in 2 weeks, and it was phenomenal. My favorite thing that's ever happened here in the city of Oak Creek.
If you haven't seen it,
it was incredible.
Definitely a cultural experience. It's nice. Plus, you can go to the market.
Yep.
So, okay. With that, motion to adjourn, please.
Grillo moves to adjourn at 8:39.
Seifert seconds.
Roll call, starting with Don.
Hold aye.
Seifert, aye.
Chandler, aye.
Anna, I.
Sullivan, aye.
Grillo, aye.
Clark, aye. Gavich, aye.
Guzekowski, aye.
Okay, that'll do it. Thank you, staff. Appreciate it. Long night, but very well done. Lot of stuff to cover there.
That was a lot.